Yo, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to discuss what I believe is a solid framework for Counter-Strike mechanics that will get you to think about how you can peek effectively. If you'd like a refresher on any of the details of the mechanics for Counter-Strike, I'll have this playlist here linked in the description where I go over in 1 minute each the main mechanics in Counter-Strike. I'm not going to dive into the when and where to peek today, as that's a little bit more nuanced and involves things like peak meta and timing things based on game sense, which is a little bit more subjective. I'll dive into those topics in future videos, but for now, let's just focus on how to peak effectively. So we're going to define the movement aspect of it, the aim aspect of it, and then we're going to talk about what I refer to as synchronization, which is combining those two things to get the most out of them with no wasted time or movement. So first, defining what a perfect peak looks like on the movement side. First thing you want to think about as you approach peeking in Counter-Strike is peeking with A or D or your side strafe keys. What this does is multiple things. Firstly, it allows you to counter-strafe easily, which is where you press a key in the opposite direction of your current momentum to bring yourself to a stop and become accurate more quickly than you would if you just released the key. So setting ourselves up for counter-strafe is the first aspect. The second aspect is the timing and the length of that counter-strafe. So we want the timing to be the moment that we release the other direction key in order to be as fast as possible. And we want the duration of that key press to be exactly the amount we need to come to a stop without moving in the other direction and becoming inaccurate again a moment after stopping. By peeking primarily with one key in one direction, you're making it much easier for you to know exactly what key to press to come to a stop instantly. That's basically an overview of what good peak movement looks like. We'll dive more into that later, but for the aim aspect of it, there's a few things. You're going to want aim that is accounting for your own movement, so adjusting your crosshair on the target depending on how you're moving, regardless of which direction or how often you're changing it. It's also going to want to track what the enemy is doing as well. No one's tracking aim is perfect, and so there will obviously be times where as you come to a stop, you're going to have to make those adjustments, which is entirely fine, and it is actually really good as you're starting to break it down into those steps: counter strafe, stop, check where you need to move your crosshair, and once you know you're on their head, that's when you take the shot. But it is still good to really focus on trying to account for the changes in those other two types of movement so that you're getting used to keeping your mind focused on what you're seeing and making adjustments as many times per second as you can. So we've touched on the movement and the aim. Now let's talk about that term synchronization and how we can optimize them to get the most out of both. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on decals and look at this wall. This is a great drill I recommend, especially for earlier players when you're getting used to this synchronization aspect. Practice here first and then move on to targets. So the sync between these two is basically summarized like this: if moving, not shooting; if shooting, not moving. It's an inverse relationship, making sure that we're using every moment that we're stopped to effectively take chances at winning the engagement, and every time we're moving to reset that accuracy and become a hard target for a moment, change position, and then try again. So what this looks like is strafing to the right, stop, shoot; strafing to the left, stop, shoot 3 times. Basically, anytime I'm not shooting, I'm starting to strafe again, either in the other direction, or you can even practice going in the same direction after you stop and shoot a couple. And just making sure that no matter how many bullets you shoot, you're stopping for the appropriate amount of time so that you're accurate the entire time you're shooting, and then immediately moving away from the spot as soon as you're done to ensure that return fire does not hit you and you're remaining a hard target. If you're struggling to get your counter strafes to stop consistently, I would do this without shooting first so that you're really just focused on whether you see that wiggle in your screen or not. Great way to do this is strafing in the same direction, stopping, and then strafing in that same direction again after you've stopped so that you're not relying on jiggling like this and then not actually ever counter-strafing to a full stop. As you're practicing this synchronization on its base form here, try to mix in as many different lengths of shooting and lengths of stopping versus strafing as you can. Once you feel comfortable with the timing and synchronization between those two things, and you're not having to think too much about when you're stopping and moving and versus when you're shooting, try to take it over to your targets here and practice making those adjustments between each: shooting, moving again, shooting, and trying to find as many chances as you can to shoot while also working on your aim adjustments to all those movements. At higher levels, you're really going to be trying to balance remaining a hard target to hit while also taking advantage of every opportunity you can to return fire. So getting really used to reacting to those moments that you're stopped in your mind to shoot and to try and shoot. At this stage where you're practicing against targets, don't be afraid to take your time, slow it down. It might look a little quick here, but strafe, counter strafe, try to track it during the middle and then make adjustments. Make sure that you're doing that mental check that you're on the target and then adjusting and moving away as soon as you are confident that you've taken out that target. If you're practicing your sprays, obviously you're going to time this movement again a little differently, but try to make those adjustments after you stop and right before you stop, and just focus on mixing it up. So that is basically what synchronization is. It's that inverse relationship between moving and shooting, and making sure that you're creating as many of those opportunities as possible while moving around. Okay, so now we've defined the base mechanics of what our peaks should look like and what we should work towards in terms of optimizing those peaks so that there's no wasted time or movement. The other big topic, aside from sync, is going to be an on-your-toes approach to the game, and this means a few things, but mainly it all falls under don't be flat-footed. What this means is you don't want to stop for too long and expose yourself to many angles. You want to be on your toes, moving around as much as possible so that you're retaining a little bit of peeker's advantage at all times, and you're as difficult to hit if someone were to swing out pre-aiming you. Now, flat-footed also kind of refers to crouching prematurely, which commits you to a fight and makes it more difficult to move back to cover and get information for free, as well as committing to sprays and just overall committing to fights in general. That all kind of falls under this idea of flat-footed and avoiding being an easy target. For example, on T side, if I made it box and I'm up here looking out for cat and window peaks, what I would consider flat-footed would be just sitting here holding like this and putting it all on me to hit the first shot, when in reality there's a good chance someone peeking here is pre-aiming this angle, and they're going to have the advantage if their pre-aim is good and their reaction is good, because I'm kind of not sure how far they're going to peek. I'm not sure exactly where their head's going to be, and my reaction time is only so good, right? So another example would be if my teammate comes to support me mid and they die from left side window as I'm holding cat here, I could try to peek and trade that, but if they're not there when I do, I don't want to just stand and wait for two reasons. A, like I said, it gives this person the peeker's advantage if they do swing out while I'm trying to hold them and standing still, but also you're overexposed to other things. So especially in scenarios where you're exposed to other angles, really stay on your toes. Take time to counter-strafe with your crosshair on that angle as well as the other one that you need to overexpose for. This, like I said, plays into the on your toes mentality. Don't stop for too long, be a hard target, and retain peeker's advantage. So up until this point, I've really only been talking about peeking with the side strafes and counter strafing, but there are scenarios where you need to take space in order to advance the round and help your team. So in these scenarios where you have to move up, it's still possible to optimize for counter strafes. Now, again, I'm not going into the when and where to peek, so this might not apply if your teammate needs help in connector and you have to rush, but when you do have control over the scenario and you can take it slow, try to implement this way of taking space. So feathering W is what you're going to be looking to do. You're never holding W for too long. You're kind of pressing it at the start of your sideways movement. You're still moving forward a little bit, but you're giving yourself as many opportunities to counter strafe as possible. So I'll break this down a little slower in what it looks like. It's going to be AW, release W, counter strafe. AD, release W, counter strafe, and back and forth, right? And so you can practice this in the bot arena and just like move around with feathering W here and there to try and get more used to how that feels. But just keep in mind that there are ways to take space without having to just like hold W the whole time and run left and right, because this is going to make it so your primary momentum is forwards, which makes you an easier target to this player because you're moving across only one plane of their movement. It keeps you more ready to take an engagement at any point, which is the idea here. You want to be ready to counter-strafe and engage at any point if there's any risk of a player peeking you. As for moments where you do have coverage, however, I recommend approaching it with only feathering W when you're moving towards coverage. For example, here, when I'm strafing left, I'm more covered here to these new angles than I am if I'm pressing W when I'm moving this direction, which is going to make it so that as I'm exposing these angles, if a player is there holding me, it's going to be much slower and harder for me to counter strafe and react to that information as it is for that player who's just holding an off angle. So try to get in the habit of, okay, if I'm hitting this wall and can't clear these other off angles, I'm going to strafe to the left, move forward, and then move my crosshair over, and I can strafe a little farther. Again, move my crosshair over. And this also plays into disciplined space taking in that you're being ready for these off angles. You're not kind of, just walking forward and then ignoring the off angles behind this wall to pre-aim sight, right? Pre-aim these off angles, be disciplined with taking space, Make sure that you're ready to counter-strafe for all of those off angles unless absolutely necessary to be quick for your teammates' support. To recap a little bit here, we can optimize the mechanics of our peaks by thinking about it in a synchronization kind of way, where every moment we're stopped, we're immediately ready to engage, and every moment we're moving, we're not engaging. We're just getting our crosshair ready for that engagement. And then we're combining that sync, that mechanical sync, with an on-your-toes approach to how you peek and take space so that you're ensuring you're ready for engagements in as many scenarios as possible. That about does it for the video here. Again, there's more to go over in terms of when and where to peek and which scenarios require that urgency. But I hope that today's video helped give you an idea of how to visualize both the mechanics and the way that you peek so that you can win more duels and start to increase your skill ceiling higher and higher with every session. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to hearing the feedback in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.